Aralsk-7, a top-secret Soviet bioweapons lab hidden away on what was once an isolated island.
It was ground zero for some of the deadliest biological experiments in history. But when the Soviet Union fell, everything was abandoned, leaving behind a ticking time bomb of hazardous materials.
Situated in the middle of Vozdrozhdenia Island, located in the middle of the Aral Sea, is the former Soviet biological weapons lab known as Aralsk-7, which was once the world's largest and most dangerous biological warfare testing facility in the world. The lab was established in 1948 and operated for the majority of the Cold War, testing a variety of harmful agents including anthrax, smallpox, the plague, tuberculosis, and tularemia. It was one of the main, if not the main, testing site for the Soviet Union's microbiological warfare group. The goal of the facility was to invent and test multiple fatal diseases, and oh did they ever. While the entire premise of the facility is already pretty bad, it actually gets worse because the biosecurity of Aralsk-7 was incredibly lackluster. It was bad, really bad. And because of this, a bunch of people died and the island eventually became one of the most deadly ghost towns known to man.
Ghost town, you say? That's right, there was a town called Kantubek on this island where all these dangerous tests were going on. It was built to house around 1,500 people, all scientists and employees of Aralsk-7 and their families. The town had a hospital, which it was really going to need. It also had residential buildings and other facilities to support the workers and soldiers stationed there. Kantubek was abandoned in 1992 after the fall of the Soviet Union. It sat there for a while, but was recently demolished. Apparently, they want to turn the land into a national park, which sounds nice in theory, but once you learn more about what went on here, that's gonna sound like the worst idea imaginable. I mean, call me crazy, but I don't think I'd be all that enthusiastic about having a picnic in a place that used to be a dumping ground for anthrax.
So, a small island with a population of about 1,500 people. What could possibly go wrong? How about a smallpox outbreak with the potential to cause millions of deaths worldwide? In 1971, field testing of 400 grams of one of the most dangerous strains of smallpox caused an outbreak that resulted in 10 individuals becoming extremely ill, 3 of which died as a result. The outbreak was due to a contamination issue. While exploring the shores surrounding Vozdrozhdenia, a lab technician from Aral, a nearby island, contracted the disease after interacting with plankton samples. When she returned home, she developed a severe fever, a terrible cough, and excruciating muscle pain, as well as a rash that covered her back, face, and scalp, despite having previously been vaccinated for smallpox. The disease went on to infect 9 others, 3 of which were unvaccinated and unfortunately did not survive.
Now, as bad as this was, things could have gone a lot worse. The disease is highly contagious, but what could have been a global disaster was narrowly avoided. When the smallpox cases in Aral were recognized, the response was quick. In under 2 weeks, around 50,000 people in Aral were vaccinated to protect them from the disease. To prevent the virus from spreading, households where people might have been exposed to the virus were quarantined, and there was also a separate isolation facility at the edge of the city for people who needed to be kept away from others. On top of that, all traffic in and out was stopped, and the cleanup involved a lot of burning things to a crisp just to make sure any traces of the virus were completely eviscerated. Now, it sounds very extreme, but fast and more intense is better than half-arsed measures that end up just dragging things out for a long stretch of time. And in the end, it did work. Better to watch your couch burn to the ground instead of your friends and family, followed by folks in the next town and the next, and so on.
Unfortunately, the smallpox outbreak of 1971 wasn't the only time diseases from the facility accidentally infected inhabitants of the surrounding island and its waters. In 1972, just 1 year after the smallpox incident, the corpses of 2 missing fishermen were found, and it appeared as though they'd been infected with the plague. Shortly after the discovery of the 2 men, others fishing in the waters surrounding Vozdrozhdenia began pulling up entire nets of dead fish. 16 years after that, another incident occurred. 50,000 antelope grazing in grasslands near the facility suddenly dropped dead, all in the span of just 1 hour, likely due to improper biochemical handling procedures and subsequent groundwater contamination. And if all that's not bad enough, the accidental outbreaks of highly contagious and highly deadly diseases conditions on the island actually got a lot worse in 1988. Why? Well, because it became an anthrax dumping ground. Anthrax, one of the deadliest and most resilient bioweapons known to man. Massive vats of anthrax mixed with bleach brought in on barges, some 100 to 200 tons, were dumped in large pits around the island. Was it effective? Not really. You see, anthrax, as I mentioned, is incredibly resilient, able to withstand pretty much anything you throw at it. When buried in the ground, inactive anthrax spores can survive for hundreds of years.
In November of 1991, Aralsk-7 was shut down. By 92, all the residents of the town had been relocated. The closure was the end to one of the most secretive and dangerous chapters in Soviet history. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the need for this biological weapons testing facility vanished almost overnight. With no purpose left, the entire operation was shut down, and the people who lived and worked there were told to leave immediately. Families were uprooted, and residents had little time to gather their belongings. Personal items were abandoned, homes were left as they were, and the entire town was now nothing but this ghostly reminder. But along with the abandoned buildings, there were more dangerous things left behind. Many of the containers holding the dangerous biological agents were not properly stored or destroyed when the facility was shut down, and these containers left behind in the rush to abandon the site have started to degrade over time. In the last decade, some of these containers have developed leaks, and because the place had been so top secret, it was almost entirely forgotten until about a decade later.
Can we just take into account the fact that they evacuated the island after it became an anthrax dumping ground? That's insane. Anyways, fast forward to 2002, after finding several viable anthrax spores in soil samples and in fear of what might happen if any of the island's remaining bioweapons were to end up in the wrong hands, the United States pledged $6 million towards a cleanup project. In full hazmat gear, cleanup teams moved several tons of infected soil into large pits lined with plastic and filled with powdered bleach. The project took 4 months to complete, and by the end of it, the bleached soil showed no signs of surviving anthrax or other biological agents. While this might seem like a major win, it honestly didn't do much, because half a century of open-air testing on the island had left both the air and most of the soil on the island highly contaminated. Furthermore, the burial pits of infected animals, containing hundreds of corpses in each, are a major potential hazard, as if flooding were to ever occur in the area, spores contained in the animals would float back up to the topsoil and earthworms would just spread them all around the island.
Well, at least Vozrozhdenia is separated from the mainland, being that it's an island. Actually, scratch that. It's not an island anymore. Vozrozhdenia Island used to be a remote and isolated place. That's why the biological weapons testing site was built on it. It was ideal for secretive work. But over the years, as the Aral Sea has dried up, what was once surrounded by water has expanded onto the mainland, becoming more of a peninsula. This has made the area more accessible, which is both a good and bad thing. On one hand, it is easier, I guess, for experts to get there and assess the situation. On the other hand, though, the dangerous stuff is now much closer and easier to stumble on. As the water receded and Vozrozhdenia connected to the mainland, the isolated secrets of the island became more vulnerable. The area isn't being cut off by water anymore, so there's a real risk that all the dangerous biological agents left behind could spread more easily if they're not contained properly. The idea that a place once so hard to reach is now just a part of the landscape is pretty concerning, especially for locals. Just think about what could happen if someone were to unknowingly wander into the area. Just for the sake of unsettling everyone in the audience, let's take this to its worst possible conclusion. Because even though the facility has been abandoned for decades, the biological agents that were tested and stored there are still dangerous. Some of the deadliest pathogens ever created by humans, designed to cause maximum harm. If any of these agents were to leak or be released, the consequences could be catastrophic. We're talking about diseases that could spread rapidly, potentially starting an outbreak that could cross borders, becoming a global health crisis. The fact that Vozrozhdenia Island is no longer isolated makes this threat so much more real. With the island now connected to the mainland, there's a higher risk that someone could accidentally come into contact with these dangerous materials and unknowingly carry them to other parts of the world. This scary part is that the cleanup efforts so far haven't been enough to fully neutralize the danger. The leaking containers and the spread of contamination could lead to a situation where we're facing a new epidemic, one that we might not be prepared to handle.
Vozrodenia? More like Vozra, don't you dare go there and mess around with biological weapons.
You said it, Hannah. I couldn't have said it better. We will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.
Cheers, friends.